So, bootstrapping a block builder. Well, over the past few months, we've been looking into how do you actually join the block builder market. I think the last talk did a good job setting up how difficult it actually is. So we're attempting to do the impossible, I guess, on some level. This is a picture of Relay Scan, which many of you may have already seen. I think it illustrates the problem with the current centralization of the market pretty well. You can see on the right-hand side here, there's two builders that are really dominating the market, producing about 95% of blocks. And that's obviously a huge centralization vector for Ethereum. The block builder, at the end of the day, acts as an arbiter of inclusion to the chain. The proposer's outsourcing its ability to pick which transactions to include, and the inverse of this power is that a block builder gets to decide which transactions to exclude. So it has power over censorship of the chain as well. So let's look at the builder profitability tab here. As you can see, it looks like 600 ETH per week is being made by each of these block builders. You might think, this is a pretty good business to get into. But this isn't entirely illustrative. It's not entirely comprehensive. This number is derived from the balance changes on a builder's address after it builds a block. It doesn't include any information that's off-chain. So, like we saw in the last talk, there's a lot of competition for actually getting the transactions that you can then extract MEV from and then include in a block on-chain. So payments for these types of things are probably being made off-chain. And the purpose of that is, one, just privacy for the transaction flow provider, and two, front-running protection, or at least exclusion of front-running rights, something like that. So these numbers are actually a lot more opaque than this. We don't know exactly how far off this is. It could be something like a factor of 10. We don't really know. All right, so where's the competition? Because in spite of this, you would still probably expect there to be more builder competition. You can see 2 years ago, Relay Scan looked a lot different. There's something like 9 different block builders that each had more than 6% of blocks being built, and no block builder had more than 17% of blocks being built. Over the years, more than 40 block builders have ceased operations. So why have they been failing? I think you could chalk it up to competition on some level. Just they're simply being outcompeted in a zero-sum market. So let's hone in onto what is the role of the builder to try to figure out why are they failing, why are they shutting down. Here I want to make a distinction between a searcher and a builder, where the searcher is the very specialized party that's actually extracting the MEV. The builder is more of an aggregator of the searcher's output, and then the party that's participating in the bids to actually get blocks on chain. So that's the interaction with the relay there. Some builders choose to collapse these center two blocks, the searcher and builder. It could be more efficient to run both of these processes in process. There's no communication overhead there. The downside though would be if you have that type of setup, you may not be able to get other searchers to work with you. And the builder, since it's an aggregator, it has a high incentive to get bundles from as many searchers as possible in order to get the most competitive block. And over here, if we look at the order flow provider, this is another party that may or may not be distinct from the searcher. A searcher may have with it its own unique order flow. If it's doing sex-dex arbitrage, the searcher itself might be an order flow provider. But at the end of the day, the flow of money here, it sort of moves away from the builder on both ends. The searcher is paying for the rights for transactions on some level. The builder can be a proxy for this. It could be a broker for this. And the money being paid here is going to an order flow provider, something like a wallet, something like an RPC. And on the other end, any excess bid that a searcher is sending to a builder has to be aggregated and used in order to be competitive in the block building auction. So in the limit, the money is moving away from the builder on both ends. So the margins are compressed as there's more competition between builders. So you can start to see how it could become a very tough market to participate in. So specifically, what is the builder doing? Why should it exist in this interaction? Well, one thing is it is the expert in actually getting a block on chain. So it has a broad, like a breadth of knowledge as far as what transactions are available. It has the ability to make certain guarantees for certain transactions that they can get in a timely manner. This might be important for sex-sex arbitrage, for example. A builder can also provide privacy guarantees. So it can provide privacy to an order flow provider, which would be good for not front-running potentially. It can provide privacy to searchers as well so that their MEV strategies aren't leaked. And it can also provide other sets of guarantees. So for a MEV searcher, it might be a specific position within a block, which enables some strategy. Can guarantee atomicity of bundles of transactions, so they like execute in sequence on chain. And then also giving a guarantee that if there's contentious state, like your transaction will execute, like it won't revert. So these are all valuable things that a builder can provide. If we go back to this diagram, if we start to think about the privacy component here of a builder, we need to look at the private transaction flow. So order flow provider to builder, and eventually to searcher. The searcher needs to have access to these transactions in order to extract MEV from them. So it needs to see the private transactions, but we don't want leakage. So how do we add privacy guarantees or some conditions of privacy to this? Well, one way to do it is if there's public order flow auctions, you can add obfuscation to transactions. So this is what Flashbot's MEV share does, MEV blocker does. They allow like a more permissionless auction for order flow, but there's some degree of obfuscation for transactions. So searchers can, on some level, extract MEV, but not like perfectly, perhaps. Another major way to do this is via like off-chain agreements, probably legal contracts. So that would be like the order flow provider and the builder, and the order flow provider and the searcher enter into legal agreements to say like these transactions have to be private. These are the conditions if not. And the need for these types of legal contracts is a big centralizing force because this requires like administrative overhead for the builder. It requires some degree of reputation in the space. You have to be a public figure on some level. And a lot of actors in this ecosystem prefer anonymity, especially searchers. So that's another big barrier to entry. Okay, and so this is actually the paper that was in the last talk. And I think it does a good job illustrating how critical the order flow is to this whole, the success of the builder. And some of the key takeaways included the diversity of order flow is very key. It correlates to the success of the builder. And I think hand in hand with that is the exclusivity of a specific builder's order flow. And it makes intuitive sense because if two builders have access to the same set of transaction, you're probably just competing on computation, on latency. But if one builder has the most important transaction in the set, all of a sudden he just has perhaps an insurmountable advantage. So this is the key thing to focus on, I think, as far as bootstrapping a builder. And how do you do it? Well, you could just try to win these order flow auctions. They are very competitive. If you have a separation between a searcher and builder, then you need to work with a searcher as a builder to get like a specialist to like work with you to win this. It would be better if they worked just with you. That might be easier said than done. Another interesting approach, this is sort of what Titan has done over the past year, is to focus on like feature richness. So making features in your builder that are conducive to a searcher's searching, and that might attract them to use your builder, and they might bring with them maybe order flow that they possess. So a specific feature would be if you send the Titan builder a transaction that runs out of gas, they'll just front the payment for the gas for you so long as the builder's balance increases at the end of the transaction. And then subsidization, you could view this also like a feature on some level. Like it's a feature very directly in that the searcher ends up having to tip less because you're just paying for the searcher's inclusion. But also, if a searcher is running some sort of strategy where they need maybe like a 10% chance that their block ends up on chain, you might have to subsidize in order for them to have that probability. And then, yeah, a major component is just business development. So this is like actually making the relationships with order flow providers, with searchers. The things that go into this include like building an ecosystem reputation and making legal agreements, contracts, being a public presence. All right, and can we get rid of these off-chain contracts? Because these are like really highly centralizing. I think it's reasonable to think of TEEs as a potential replacement for a legal contract, because if what you really want is just to keep the execution of the transactions private, or the execution of the builder over private transactions, TEs can let you do that, and they can let you do it with a pretty minimal performance impact. They're not bulletproof though, and because of this, like if it's really like high value transactions, it might still require a legal agreement in conjunction with the TE. So this isn't necessarily a catch-all solution. Something that would hopefully be more of a catch-all is like a pure cryptography solution. Something like threshold encryption or fully homomorphic encryption. But both of these add a lot more of a performance overhead, especially presently. But maybe in the future that can be reduced to where the performance trade-off versus the trustlessness isn't quite as great. So let's look at specifically the builder software, because actually working with this is a barrier to entry in itself. There are some open source options that are good. The RBuilder, MEV-RS, what you can do is you can extend these, you can start with these to like help you hit the ground running. At some point you might need like more optimization, maybe optimization you don't want to share, because you're trying to like bootstrap your builder. You want every edge you can get, especially if you're trying to overcome these other network effects like order flow. So that might lead you to trying to start a builder from the ground up. That would also help you build some expertise in your builder. All right, then infrastructure. This is another barrier to entry. A lot of the game for a builder is minimizing latency. You want to minimize latency because if you're able to include a transaction that's produced later, then that broadens your set of transactions for potential inclusion in your block. Like maybe the most valuable transaction in a slot comes like just before the end, and you can include it and no one else can. That would be an advantage. You want to minimize latency from transaction origination to your builder, and you also want to minimize it from your builder to the relay. The way to minimize transaction origin latency, there's a few ways, but you could use like an optimized mempool. There's some third-party services that do this. You could build your own sort of infrastructure for this, where you have sentry nodes around the network, and maybe they're directly connected to each other and just like sending transactions back and forth. You could also potentially co-locate at an order flow provider. That would be like how to minimize it maximally. But on the other end, you probably want to co-locate with a relay, because that's an easy way to minimize the latency from the builder to the relay, obviously. And relays might be geographically distributed to serve different proposers around the world, like with lower latency. So you might also want to co-locate your builder with a single relay, but at each instance of a relay. So generally this leads to, you probably want a very flexible DevOps infrastructure setup. You probably want to use something like Kubernetes, because at some point you might want to horizontally scale as well. So if you want like multiple clusters around the world, horizontally scaled, it gets pretty complex, and the cost runs out pretty quick, because you're dealing with full nodes for a lot of this, and full nodes are expensive to run. All right, and then projecting the role of the builder into the future. This is another challenge in trying to start a builder. It's not really just a stagnant target you're aiming at, it's a moving target. So you'll probably want to incorporate what do things like base sequencing, pre-confirmations, ePBS, like how do these impact how your builder will develop in the future. Like maybe if you can get ahead on one of these things, that would give you a bit of an edge to try to enter the market. It's interesting, pre-confirmations are actually similar to the guarantees you would get now from a builder, as far as like, oh, like I want the distraction like not to revert. But they happen earlier in the slot, and they can happen with the risk of the builder losing collateral otherwise. So there's kind of like some overlap with a pre-confirmation and like a builder's current role. And yeah, so right now we're building blocks on Hleschki. It's a lot easier there, lower competition, thankfully. Our intent is to try to make a builder that's competitive, and from there, work on trying to push the boundary of how to decentralize it, how to make it more transparent, how to make it more permissionless. This feels like a more natural approach to us, as opposed to starting with the theoretical solution and trying to make it performant. Probably because we're a team of engineers. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I hope that inspires a few people here to try something out. If I could just have you in the middle. We're going to take some of these questions, but please feel free to keep submitting them. First one, what prevents a builder, relay, or proposer from themselves front-running a searches bundle?
Builder, relay, proposer. All right, so the builder wouldn't front-run the searcher's bundle, because they would have some sort of agreement, and this is where like either the obfuscation comes in, or maybe a legal agreement, or just trust, that like the searcher will continue to send the builder bundles unless, you know, the builder front-run them. But from the relay's perspective, the relay is like a trusted intermediary where they'll see the bundles, and they serve the purpose of actually blinding the payload and caching it before sending it to the proposer. And the idea there is that the proposer is going to be like the most distributed anonymous actor here. So they would have the easiest way to, I guess, just steal the MEV and, you know, just wait for the next proposal in like 6 months. They don't really care. Okay. But the relay has to have some degree of reputation, because it's acting like every slot. So yeah.
All right. So next question, does builder benefit from being closer to popular public RPC servers, such as latency benefit?
Oh, yeah, I think definitely. It's tough to say, like we don't have like empirical evidence of this yet, but you want to minimize that type of latency if possible, if that's where you're getting order flows from, but also latency to the proposer or to the relay. And which of those dimensions is more valuable to optimize for, I'm not sure. It might be better to do it near your order flow provider, because you don't know which relay is going to have the block that wins the auction, for example.
Okay. Next one, do RPC providers like Alchemy or Infura sell a transaction for order flow? Should we take precaution against this?
Yeah, they might. I don't have personal insight into this, but yeah, they might. Should you take personal action? I mean, you could try to put pressure on these RPCs to say like, oh, if you're selling this, like I should get a rebate. Like if my transaction is going to, I should get some money back for that. I think that's like the natural end state of the market. It's just not quite there yet.
Okay. What do you think of execution auctions and how they might change the function of the builder?
I think execution auctions are really cool. One thing it does is it kind of generalizes the interaction between the builder and the proposer. All of a sudden, the builder doesn't have to like go directly through the proposer to broadcast a block. It's like you buy the block beforehand, a builder would, and then you have the rights to like do your best job building. So in some ways, it simplifies it. It's sort of like it could be viewed as making the building set more permissionless, but you obviously have these other barriers to entry still, so maybe not quite.
Okay. What if a proposer, such as a node provider, is launching his block builder without a relay? Is it bad?
A node provider with his own block builder without a relay. I think it depends if the proposer, if this is like a big set of proposers using a single builder, that would be bad. If it's a single proposer with their own builder, that doesn't seem so bad. That seems the same as like you're using a local block builder, but the best version of that. If every proposer had their own highly optimized block builder, you'd still have this really decentralized block production network. So you'd still have the same like censorship properties we have today.
Okay. Next one, I'll allow you to choose which one of the three as the last question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, is the link between searcher and builders public on chain? For instance, which builder a famous searcher like Jared from Subway uses? Oh, okay, I think they actually touched on that in the last talk. And they were able to see that recently Beaver build is getting more flow from Jared. So there is a way to track it on some level, but we haven't dug into this too much. Sounds like the last team did.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean, for your session. Please, another 7